Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I want to start by acknowledging that UBC's Vancouver campus is located on the traditional territory of the Amaskan people and recognize that you're joining us today from many lands whose ancestral caretakers deserve our respect and admiration. It is my pleasure to host this new teaching and learning seminar series. For the first time, we are hosting a summer version, and the turnout is pretty good for June. I'm happily surprised, and thanks for being here again. Today's talk is called Implementation of Universal Design for Learning in a Hands-on Forestry Course, Experiences and Reflections. Salmon and Frederick Qi will delight us with a topic that is extremely important for helping us make learning more accessible to all. Lee is a professional forester who specializes in forest development, planning, and management. These practices areas are his passion and represent his core teaching interests. Coming from a professional background, his teaching approach is centered around experiential and active learning. Lee is committed to preparing students for their careers after UBC while improving himself as a teacher. Frederick works as the teaching and educational technology specialist in forestry and forestry's teaching and learning support team. He supports teaching teams in exploring and implementing a diverse range of educational technologies and is committed to facilitating an accessible, inclusive, and engaging learning environment. I have to say that Frederick's also part of the technology team that puts these together every event. So I was really worried that how would he do it? But Aidan is here to fill in for him. So thank goodness that'll work really well. For more context about the topic, Universal Design for Learning, UDL, is an approach to course design and delivery that aims to maximize learning outcomes by fostering accessibility and inclusivity in the learning space. In practice, UDL means that all course participants are appropriately challenged by learning materials, regardless of their barriers to engagement. Some of the principles of UDL were implemented in the course Title III and stand level measurements, Forestry 239, which involves extensive mathematics and physical hands-on learning. Over the past year, our wonderful speakers today participated in the UBC UDL Fellows Program to enhance this course. They will share their experience implementing UDL in Forestry 239, what learning difficulties they addressed, the solutions deployed to develop expert learners, and what could be incorporated into other courses within the Faculty of Forestry. As always, a high level of appreciation goes to the Dean's Office and all of the colleagues that make this event possible. And thanks to those of you who interrupted your busy lives at this beautiful sunny moment to be here in person and remotely. So without further ado, a round of applause for the speakers and for yourselves for being here. All yours.
Sure this is working. Oh, I might need to click on the, yeah, there we go. So today's seminar, we're gonna try to be very quick, but we did a very large project, but we'll try to summarize it very quickly. Frederick will be giving you an overview of accessibility and universal design for learning in our context. We should give you an overview of Forest 239 and why it was a candidate for redesign. We'll be looking at the path that we took to actually implement UDL in this course, as well as some of the implemented solutions to kind of inspire folks and show you different technologies that Frederick and his team has come up with, as well as some of the outcomes in the course, student feedback, and additional, shall we say, resources. So I'll hand it over to you, Frederick. Oh, sorry. We did want to engage the audience a little bit here, just to get to know you guys a little bit. So we've got this Slido question here, and I'm going to ask you two questions. The very first question is going to be just identifying, if you're an instructor or a student, whether you've dealt with the Center for Accessibility, like an accommodation letter, for example, or maybe you haven't dealt with that aspect of academia. So you can join the link here, and then we should be able to launch the very first poll there. So if you're an instructor, the first two categories would be applicable to you. Or if you're a student, maybe you've had to deal with the accommodation letter process, or maybe you haven't, maybe you're not even aware of it. And I think if we show results, we should have some preliminary results in here. So it looks like about half of the folks on the instructional side have had to deal with some level of accommodation through Center for Accessibility. I'm definitely in that camp. I almost always have a handful of students with accommodation letters, and that's just part of teaching. The next, I think we can probably close that poll. And the next question we'd like to ask is just to get a sense of what you think about in terms of accessibility. What word or phrase comes to mind when we say accessibility? Okay. Equity, easy, challenge, special needs. Inclusion, I like that. Accommodating. I like all of these because it really what I'm trying to do here is get a sense of how you're sort of framing the idea of accessibility. And looks like a lot of folks mentioned inclusion, which I think is really at the heart of UDL. So that's great. It seems like we're all kind of thinking about it in an appropriate manner. So now I think we can just let you kind of go over your stuff, Frederick.
Thank you. So in terms of teaching and learning, accessibility means the attempt to remove different types of learning barriers, such as in physical environments, in technologies, in systems, etc., so that each and every student would have equitable participation. Here at UBC, according to Center for Accessibility, about 5 to 10% of students are registered with them for academic accommodations. However, approximately 25% of students report having some form of accessibility needs, such as support for mental health, ADHD, and chronic conditions, as we can see from the donut chart here. It's true that we may not be able to remove every single barrier for our students, but the key point here is that some of our students do have accessibility needs, and we are able to provide a more accessible and inclusive learning environment for all of them. In order to do this, educators can consider Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. UDL is an educational framework that improves and optimizes our teaching and learning for everyone. It also helps us to recognize and address diverse learning needs, as well as to reduce learning barriers. Under this framework, there are 3 principles to provide multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. The first principle aims to keep students interested and motivated through different activities, challenges, and rewards. The second principle here aims to give students different ways to learn information, just like some people learn better by reading papers, while others learn better by watching videos or listening to the audio. The third principle here aims to allow students to show what they know in different ways. For example, students may be able to make a video, write an essay, or create a project to demonstrate their understanding. Following these principles, we enhanced FRST 239 over the past year, and Lee will tell us more about it.
Yeah, so the enhancement of FRST 239, I took the course over from a very successful instructor, Val LeMay, or professor rather. And, I was interested in kind of putting my own mark on it, not necessarily with the UDL framework, But when Frederick and I were enrolled in the UDL Fellows Program, this program is really designed to kind of incubate these ideas around UDL and start disseminating them throughout the UBC campuses. So FRST 239 kind of popped out as a really good opportunity for that. And if you are interested in that program, there's the QR code for it. But can you push the slide forward, please? Thank you. For those of you that don't know, FRST 239 or tree and stand level measurements is a required course under the Canadian Forest Accreditation Board for all forestry degree programs that are basically preparing students to become registered professional foresters. So there are a number of things that absolutely have to be captured within a course of this nature. Certainly, we are covering basic geographic information systems and remote sensing. But I would say the bulk of the emphasis of this course is really on measuring trees and the procedures therein, estimating tree and log volumes, dealing with sample and sampling statistics, as well as data summarization and presentation. So it's really critical, in my opinion, it's critical that the students come out of UBC with the foundational skills and understanding of these concepts. But it's also really valuable in the sense that if we can improve FRST 239 in some way, when students are in second year, they have a better grasp of these concepts going into third and fourth year and make it a little bit easier for other instructors to kind of do their job as well. How was this traditionally done? Pre and post-pandemic, this was always an in-person course, in-person lectures with interspersed activities, and then field-based and computer-based labs, which actually this course is very successful in its structure. Pedagogically, it makes a lot of sense to do this stuff. But there are certain groups of students that just don't engage necessarily as well with that course structure as they could. So the path to actually implementing UDL in this course was to actually reflect on what the learning objectives at their core were for this particular class, and sort of evaluate, what are the obvious barriers to learning? So one of the obvious ones for field-based stuff would be the physical ability to go to the field, right? But that was a very surface level assessment on my part. When we actually spoke to the students, there were some real barriers to learning that kind of came with even just having access to Canvas, having access to different learning materials. So things like how the Canvas site is organized, the learning materials being kind of out of date, good content, but just presented in a weird way. So things like this. And a lot of that was informed by actually talking to students and surveying them as well. And going back through and kind of like rereading some of the student of experience of instruction surveys and kind of putting a UDL lens on some of their comments. So once we had done that, we came up with a pool of solutions that we felt would address some of the barriers. And then we evaluated those solutions to see whether they would undermine the learning objectives in a meaningful way, like, it's actually going to remove the necessary challenge of learning in this particular case, or maybe it was something that was just not feasible for the scope of our project, right? It costs money or it requires a lot of assistance. Once we had kind of synthesized what solutions we wanted to do, we then went ahead and implemented them in January. And now we're kind of looking at what the fruits of that labor were through different analytics in Canvas, different analytics in Prairie Learn, and looking at some of the student of experience of instruction results. So the barriers that we identified, I alluded to, was organization of resources and students, how they access Canvas. different visual abilities actually popped up in sort of anecdotal ways, talking to students with color blindness, for example, or just eye strain. Visualization of concepts. This was something that I kind of identified early on, that students really struggle with certain concepts in tree measurements. The mode of engagement. So students like to say that, oh, this course should be online. I mean, I personally don't think it should be an online course. However, that said, maybe that's their preferred way of engaging with lecture content and activities. Limitations of in-class activities. I would say, generally speaking, students really like in-class activities. Some absolutely hate them. But I would say that for the most part, having in-class activities does help with learning outcomes. It's just, there's only so much you can do in 1 hour with a student. And when you're dealing with 45 to 60 students, you're not going to be able to reach every one of them in a meaningful way. So I do want to emphasize some of these things that we've done. I'm not going to go over a complete list of solutions that we kind of filtered out, but I will show you kind of what we've sort of come up with, generally speaking. I don't know if I can hit the play button on that one. Oh, I've hit the wrong one. So this is this is what we're doing. Oh, it's totally out of order now. Okay, so on the left-hand side of the screen here, this is how Canvas was set up in 2021 when I first started, right? So in my naive beginnings as an instructor, I created a Canvas site that if you open it on a mobile device, will just confront you with an endless stream of text, and you have to scroll around looking for information. That's really not helpful. Plus, some of the drop-down menus and stuff in mobile are not very good. And keep in mind, most students interact, at least the ones I spoke with, interact with Canvas on iOS, Android of some ilk, right? It'd be an iPad or a phone. So making the Canvas site actually optimized for mobile is really beneficial. So here we can see the new version of the course. The entry point for the course is really basic. There's just a bunch of hot links that go directly to where the students need to be when they need to be there. So, you know, they still have access to, do you mind clicking play on this one? So they still have access to like weekly modules, and a lot of students don't have issues with weekly modules, but some students said they don't like that. So what we did is we actually created content by topic and then organized all of the lectures and recorded lectures under these little trees. And the students love that. Like, okay, I need to brush up on, say, tree height measurements. I know exactly where I need to find that. There's a recording that explains how to do that stuff. And there's some Prairie Learn practice quizzes that kind of go along with it. And it's really kind of optimized for mobile. That way, you know, even when you view it on a desktop, it's still pretty good. And the other thing I'll point out is having lecture recordings. I don't think that's a groundbreaking thing, but the students really do appreciate having lecture recordings that are kind of purpose-built. So I used to do hybrid lecture recordings that were really janky and not very good. You know, the audio quality was kind of hit or miss and the recordings were not that great. Actually, creating purpose-built ones were really beneficial and well received. The next thing I'd like to point out is the slide design. The slides that I inherited for the course are perfectly fine, and I actually have no problem with this slide whatsoever. However, some students highlighted to me that the contrast was not great for them because of the font colors, and there was some issues with looking at it late at night and kind of the glare that comes from some of the color. So I did decide to try something, which was basically converting it to a dark color scheme and using high contrast fonts and avoiding colors that are kind of highlighted as being problematic for people with colorblind issues. And it's worth pointing out that everything is sort of presented to the students after the fact, not only in recordings, but also as PDF slides. So the PDFs are really critical if you want to use screen readers, for example, which kind of gets us to the next part. So alt text for screen readers. So what Frederick and I thought would be a little bit fun is to challenge you to come up with alt text for this photo here. And if you don't know what alt text is, alt text allows a screen reader to describe an image to a student or a viewer without having to write a lengthy figure caption. It just perceives the text that's attached to the image. And I'll just give anybody that wants to participate in that, say a minute or so just to participate in it. And we'll look at a couple of them and I'll let you know what I think about your alt text, okay? So we're evaluating you on this. Okay. Well, I can tell we all like blueberries, that's for sure. Blueberries that have water droplets on them. Greater than 20 fresh blueberries. Yeah, so simply calling them, I think that's probably enough for now, Frederick. Simply calling them blueberries is great, right? Like there's no context to this photo. However, if I was teaching, say, a taxonomy course, the alt text that I would provide for that photo wouldn't be just blueberries. It would be the fruiting body or the fruiting structure of a Vaccinium myrtleoides, for example. And then you could even point out that there's still some remnant floral structure on the actual berry, right? So it's totally context specific. And that's really critical. The other thing is with alt text, you don't have to spoon feed the students conclusions about the image, which I can show them in the next slide. So here's a very simple photo that I show the students. And this is all the context of this slide is all about understanding damages to trees when they're young. So the alt text for this particular image is simply a small diameter tree with thin bark that has been scraped off by a deer, right? In the context of the slide that this photo came from, the students are going to put together, okay, that the damage that's been caused by that deer to that tree is eventually going to become a scar that will affect the tree's volume going forward. So, somebody else might describe that as, say, a young sugar maple, and they might ignore the scar, right? So that's the kind of premise of alt text. And it really does force you to really look at the imagery in your slides and say, are all of my images just decorative and they look cool? Or do they actually add insight to the topic that I'm teaching? So it is useful as an instructor, and it's very useful to the students as well. Another thing we looked at was these older conceptual drawings for different sampling techniques, different statistical methods. So Peter, you would recognize this diagram. You're the one that originally drew it, and I'm still using it to this day. It's a very good static diagram. For those of you that don't know, this is horizontal point sampling, which basically involves projecting an angle from a given point in a radius, right? The students really do need to understand how this works. And the static diagrams are good for maybe, say, 50% of the students that can listen to me drone on about horizontal point sampling, and they can put it together in their mind. The other 50% of the students probably aren't going to understand this until they actually go out and use a prism or a reloscope and actually do this. So The labs are going to work a lot better if the students understand this concept before they go out and use it. So our solution to this was, to basically, if I can get over there, animate that process. So we show them how the plot is laid out by projecting an angle. But in the inlay animation, we show them how a prism works in the first person view. This really helped clarify for a lot of students how horizontal point sampling works, right? So, you know, it's a Bachelor of Science. Not every student is going to go out and do horizontal point sampling for their career, but they absolutely need to understand this concept, even if they can't physically execute it. So the animations were a big hit. We used it in multiple lectures, and I would absolutely do more of them. The last thing I'm going to cover before I eat into too much of Frederick's time is trying to eliminate the need to go into the field as much. So that was one of the biggest barriers, was students' ability to get to campus, right? It's not just about physical ability to do field work, right? UDL is encompassing a whole range of barriers, right? So you might have a job, maybe you have kids, maybe you have an elderly parent that is sick, right? And you could not come to lab that week. My solution to help deal with that was to create a fixed area plot using a virtual environment. So basically what we did was took a bunch of hemispherical photos, and then for each plot, we also took photos of the measurements being taken. So we're not just spoon feeding the students DBH data, they actually still have to read the DBH tape. In Lightroom, you convert that to a high definition hemispherical photo. And then in Photoshop, you compress that photo and bring it into H5P, which is a web-based application for making a bunch of different interactive, shall we say, learning activities. And I don't think I'm going to play this whole thing because it's a little bit long, but I do want to emphasize that this was I did put a lot of energy into this side of things, and I do think it paid off. Despite the amount of energy, the H5P process, which we all have access to as instructors and staff here at UBC, it's very simple. Like, I thought it was going to be a lot of HTML text editing. It was a lot of drag and drop, actually. So, you know, I'm able to bring in my 360 photo and basically populate that plot with all of the tree data that the students may or may not use. So yeah, maybe we can just pause it there and I can just skip ahead to the next part. Once you've actually created that in H5P, back here. Once you've created that in H5P, you can then embed it in Canvas. So this is exactly what the students got to see. So multiple means of engagement. They had the option to do the fixed area plot lab in person, because some students really do prefer in-person learning. And some students had the opportunity to do the virtual forest exercise, which again, they still have to understand the concept of a plot. They still have to be able to do basic tree calculations, and they still have to be able to do to read a DBH tape. They're just not physically doing it. The nice thing about these high definition photos, as opposed to an Insta360, the students can see the bark, so you can challenge them to identify the trees. They can see defects in the tree, and they can also look at the tree's position in the canopy. So you do not have to necessarily spoon feed them a lot of like, how big is this cedar, that kind of stuff. You can really challenge them, not physically, but in a very similar way to what they would do in the field. And it's worth pointing out, I wasn't able to implement this with horizontal point sampling, so the students still have to go out and use prisms, but the students really enjoyed this, the ones that actually did it. So I do think it was a lot of fun. And okay, I'll stop rambling. I'll give it to you, Frederick.
Okay, thank you, Lee. So in addition to the fieldwork, FRST 239 also has 4 quizzes in Canvas that are designed to help students review key concepts and practice calculations before exams. To encourage the students to take these quizzes and try different questions, we enabled multiple attempts and also randomized questions. But if you have ever set up or taken a Canvas quiz before, you may already know that the options for question randomization within Canvas are somewhat limited. In fact, there are 2 options. The first one is to shuffle answers within a question. So with every attempt, the order of the question would change. The second one is to create a group of questions first, and then have Canvas randomly pick questions from that group. So in this case, you see that in order to improve the power of randomization and allow different students to see different questions, teaching teams need to create a very large group of questions in the first place, which is not an easy task. So we wanted to take a step further. We wanted a system that can automatically generate different versions of questions for us so that students would have a more adaptive and engaging learning experience. Let's say you have a question like this. For Douglas fir, we know the DBH, we know the height. We wanted the students to calculate its wood volume using the taper model. But instead of manually creating different versions of this question, we would like the system to do that for us by changing the tree species as well as the values for DBH and height. And these variations are all auto-generated, and the correct answers for them are calculated by the system as well. And this is what PrairieLearn is known for. PrairieLearn is an online learning platform based on machine learning algorithms. Compared to Canvas, it can automatically generate different versions of questions, so students can retry different questions until they fully understand the course content. Additionally, it's also capable of automatically grading these questions so that it reduces the workload on teaching teams. We transformed the 4 quizzes from Canvas to PrairieLearn in FRST 239. For the calculation questions, they are relatively easy to implement within PrairieLearn. Here we can see how numerical values are different for every variant of the same question. For definition questions, they are a bit more difficult to implement with variations, but still, it's possible. What we did was to combine all definition questions into one group. Then PrairieLearn randomly picks 4 terminologies for students to match their correct definitions. With every new attempt, students will see a different list of questions. In addition, we also explored map-related questions. In this example, we can see a map for forest inventory. A region within the map is randomly selected and highlighted by PrairieLearn. Then, the corresponding data for this region are displayed below the map. For numerical questions, they are auto-graded, and students will get feedback to know if they are on the right path. For short answer questions, they must be manually graded by the teaching team. And students can also try new variants to see different maps and different corresponding data, which provides them an opportunity for improvement. At the end of the term, more than 85% of students in FRST 239 found these PrairieLearn quizzes very helpful. The bar charts here compare the average duration and the scores of the same quizzes in Canvas and PrairieLearn. We can see that students spent way more time in PrairieLearn than in Canvas. Some students said that they tried new variants in ParaLearn repeatedly to get a better understanding and also tested their own theories on how to answer these questions that they did not understand. As a result, we can see that the scores from ParaLearn are much lower than those from Canvas, but it's understandable. Beyond FRST 239, ParaLearn has been used in many courses in the Department of Computer Science, and they love it. So if your courses involve coding, feel free to give it a try. Through this platform, students can test their codes and see if the codes work. If no, they can try another attempt and correct the answer. If your courses have math or statistics questions, ParaLearn is also a good option to consider. From this example, we can see that the equation, the visualization of the equation, the correct answer, and the alternative answers are all auto-generated by the system. And every time the student clicks new variant, a new equation will be generated. Similarly, if your courses have physics or engineering questions, you can also try ParaLearn. It can simulate complex situations for students to explore. In this example, we can see that a student can add, move, or rotate elements onto the image. The positions of the elements are determined by ParaLearn, and the correct answer is determined with some allowance for inaccuracy because the placement will not be exact. Additionally, ParaLearn offers several open educational resources for users to try. Feel free to scan the QR code on the screen to check them out. I wanted to mention that the process of developing questions in ParaLearn requires Python, and it could be time-consuming sometimes, but the TLS team is here to help. We've got amazing tech rovers, so let us know if you need support or have ideas. We can help. And I also wanted to mention that at the moment, ParaLearn is not a centrally supported tool at UBC, but it has passed the privacy impact assessment so that future courses can use it. If you'd like a free trial, let us know, and we can set up a sandbox for you.
Thank you, Frederick. And yeah, now that we've been kind of like looking at all of the different ParaLearn stuff, it is very powerful, and I'm really excited to bring it into some of my forest operations courses as well. So that said, did we actually generate expert learners when we executed this protocol in our course? Hard to say, really, when you only have 2 data points for me personally, and they're all post-pandemic students. So their learning abilities are pretty all over the place. I would point out the fact that 82% for lab exercises, there's no significant change there. So to me personally, that means that the lab exercises didn't get any easier based on reducing barriers to learning, which is good. And they also didn't introduce any anomalies in terms of students colluding more than they would normally. It's worth pointing out too that early in the course, the students were somewhat reluctant to use ParaLearn. So there's not a significant difference in the midterm assessments. However, I do think that even though I only have a sample of 2, that the introduction of ParaLearn and the uptick in ParaLearn in this course did have a substantial impact on the students' ability to succeed in the exam. And the exam is handwritten, it's closed book with a cheat sheet, and it's basically, it's an old school exam for anybody that's written an old school exam in a booklet, right? So the students performed very well in that, and I think it partly was because of ParaLearn and the ability to practice different foundational questions and go into the exam and use those as building blocks to actually answer some of the harder questions that we put into the exams that require multiple calculations. That's my perspective on it. Like I say, it's hard to draw a definitive conclusion with only a limited time frame here, but that's what I see when I look at these grade outcomes. This is what the students from the student experience of instruction had to say about it. And I just pulled the comments that were related to accessibility and UDL. And not all of them are good, okay? So organized, simple way. They like the flexibility of the assignments, and the recordings were really critical. And I did have a number of students talk to me about the quality of recording they were really happy about. This, you know, like, yeah, Lee's putting in good effort, but it could be better. The reason they think it could be better is because one of the lectures that they went to had a visualization and animation that helped them understand the concept that they were dealing with. So maybe they skipped a couple lectures that had a few of the animations or whatever, but the point here is that the animations were actually really helpful to this particular student, and they're probably helpful to a lot of students. Definitely a number of students really like the virtual lab. And again, the organization of materials is what came up first in this particular comment. Recordings. And the last comment, I think, I found it very interesting. Lee is trying to understand each student's situation and learning process. I do care about my students, but realistically, that is actually a byproduct of implementing UDL, providing people with opportunities for different ways to engage with the content, the choice of how they want to learn the materials. That's just a byproduct of doing UDL. I do care about the students, but that is what it is. So just wanted to share that kind of information so you actually know at least what some of the preliminary outcomes of this project were. I'll pass it back to you, Frederick.
Thank you, Lee. So for the last part, I'd like to share some resources for inclusive teaching and UDL so that every teaching team can look over and try it. In particular, we put together a tip sheet that summarizes the practical tips for creating accessible content and activities. So feel free to go to our TLS website to check it out. In this tip sheet, you'll find recommendations for text-based, media-based, and AI-based content and activities. And here are some of the highlights. So for text-based content, there are two tools in Canvas that we really recommend. The first one is the immersive reader, which is available within Canvas. It can automatically convert content into different alternative formats, such as text to audio and color enhancements, offering students more options to get engaged. Note that this feature is a user setting, so students really have to enable it on their end to see the immersive reader. We've trialed this tool in multiple courses, and the students really love the text to audio option so that they can listen to Canvas pages. The second tool is the Canvas Accessibility Checker. So when you're editing Canvas pages, you can use this tool to identify accessibility issues, such as the headings may not be sequential or alt text is needed for images, etc. And then you can apply fixes directly within this tool. So for more details about these tools, you're welcome to self-enroll in our Canvas site for accessibility tools. And you will also find more information about UDL principles under modules. We will be sending the link into the chat for Zoom as well. Next, for media-based content and activities, there are several strategies that you can consider to enhance accessibility. For example, you can enable captions for videos and recordings. Many UBC-supported tools, such as Zoom, MS Teams, and Kaltura, have live captions or auto captions. Additionally, you can provide transcripts or notes to help students better understand the audio and video materials. Also, you can incorporate questions into videos to improve engagement. This can be done in Kaltura or H5P through interactive questions, or you can just verbally ask questions in the video and then have students complete corresponding quizzes or assignments in Canvas. So here's an example of what auto caption and transcript looks like in Kaltura videos. And here's an example of interactive questions in Kaltura video. And moving on, generative AI is the buzzword right now, and it can also be used to enhance accessibility. For example, it can be used as a translation aid or a debate partner to enrich class discussions from different angles and perspectives. Or it can be used to support students to brainstorm ideas or support them with literature review. If you plan to create AI-based content or activities, please keep in mind that not all AI tools have met UBC's information security standards. So make sure to check out UBC's guidelines on generative AI. And the CTLT also has a website that outlines which tools are approved with caution for course use and which ones are not. Make sure to check that out as well. And lastly, UBC has created a UDL Hub from which you will find additional resources on accessibility and UDL there. So feel free to take a look as well. And that is the end of our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lee and Frederick, for your amazing talk. And I can see that UDL is very helpful. And putting myself in the shoe of students with accessibility needs, I think students can benefit a lot from UDL. And after they finish the course, and even after they graduate, they might go to their workplace, which might not have some accessibility help. So is there something that students can take away from your class and then take to the workplace?
Really consider that postgraduate sort of side of things, like taking my principles with them to work, but certainly like they have access to all of the UBC resources. I mean, I'm kind of just putting it into the course and they're kind of soaking it up, but I'm not really telling them that I'm necessarily doing UDL. Like I bring it up a couple of times in the course to be transparent, but I'm not hammering it with it. But Frederick, I don't know, maybe you have some thoughts on it.
Well, I think for students, if you do have accessibility needs, I think it's important that you talk to the teaching teams, or if you need a long-term support, you also talk to Center for Accessibility. That's within the university setting. But I think also some of the tools that we mentioned, like Immersive Reader, is available in other software as well. So you can take a look at that and see if they would help a little bit to ease and improve the accessibility, if that's going to be helpful.
Yeah. Hi, thanks, Frederick and Lee. Great presentation. I really appreciated your little breakdown of stats on the 25% of students that have certain issues they identified. I wish the slide had stayed up longer, though. I only got 3 of them written down, just an FYI. So I love the approach to technology, but as soon as you said limiting field work, field-based learning, my little red flag went up, because I work for Forest Professionals BC, and we talk a lot about, well, we hear a lot from licensees and consultants and contractors when students graduate on their field-based competencies. A lot of complaints. Now, a lot of it's bullshit, to be honest, but there are some legitimate complaints from folks on the probably poor field-based competencies. Because as you know, measuring a tree in the field is just not a matter of putting a DBH tape around the bole of a tree. You've got bugs, you've got a big root crown that they're trying to stand on, you've got timber cruising standards that they have to meet, you've got, you know, you know, a senior field worker who's saying, hurry up, get on with it. You know, you want to get back to the truck. So you add all that together. The field experience after university is really different, or it can be different for students. So have you considered how, if you move towards less field-based learning and do more virtual learning, sure, they're achieving the school-based learning outcomes, but have you considered what impact that might have on their demonstration of those competencies in the field outside of school?
So
That's very long. Sorry.
no, it's all good. I kind of expected this question. I wasn't expecting someone from FPBC to be here, but so here's my perspective. I showed up here as an instructor to teach forest operations. I basically spent 7 years in the bush teaching entry-level people with absolutely no forestry education or very rudimentary forest education. In the context of my course and where we're actually teaching, I mean, yeah, these students are going to get chewed up and spit out on the mid-coast. There's no way for me to prepare them for that. From my perspective, as somebody that's actually had to train folks with very limited abilities, I think it's much better that they understand the foundational concepts of measurements, because for me as a supervisor out there, if this person's not able to put it together and wrap a tree and take the measurements within the first couple of days, they're not going to make it. You know, it's quite, I don't want to say it's rudimentary to teach people how to use these instruments in the field, but it kind of is. Like, as somebody that's been on the employment side, like, you do have to take a couple of days, maybe even a full shift to actually get people on board with doing things the way you want them to be done. So for me personally, like in the context of the course, I have limited amount of time, and whether somebody can use a DBH tape, like physically do it, doesn't really mean a lot to the overall learning objectives, because the students that want to use the DBH tape and go out and use the clinometers and stuff like that, they still have the opportunity to do that stuff. We have field courses and field schools for a reason. That's my perspective on it. Like, I went to Lakehead, the very first day of class, we're using that stuff. And they basically use that as a way to weed out students. But there's a lot of students that come through our halls that actually are very bright, very gifted students that aren't necessarily going to be field foresters, if you know what I mean.
Sure. Yeah. Good answer. I mean, I guess how to actually put a DBH tape around a tree, any supervisor can instruct a field summer student or a new hire to do that.
Yeah.
In theory, they probably likely don't have the time to teach them the theory and the trigonometry
Exactly.
related to that. So that makes total sense. But
Yeah.
don't do less. I think personally, I think we should have more field-based learning in the college and university programs. But that's just me personally. At the end of the day, they meet the competencies upon graduation outlined by Forest Accreditation Board. That's the standard, right?
Yeah.
So if they can meet those competencies, that's good.
Yeah. I mean, I totally understand that perspective. And I mean, I've been there, you know, as a person, like, wow, this guy or girl really can't do any of this stuff. But maybe that's not their end trajectory, right? Like, we're not training them to be, in this particular institution, we're not training them to be technicians. They might have to do a technician's role for, say, 2 to 3 years. But I think most grads of our program want to kind of go into more of a managerial phase. I don't know.
It's a couple of summers,
Yeah, that's a good motivator.
I also wanted to add that if like we do encourage students to participate in in-person field activities, but if they do need help or do need accommodation, we are able to provide some activities for them through this virtual setting. And then after the field work, even for people who are able to go to the forest and then take measurements, then they can still use these virtual tours to review concepts and practice calculations afterwards. I think that will be also very helpful for them.
Any other question? Maybe in this side. I have one. So I noticed in the slide about the different barriers that were identified by UBC, the big chunk is just mental health in general. I think it was 48%. Is there a breakup of that? If you get into that website, do we know something more about what mental health challenges are people having? Because it's so broad that there's no way of turning that into UDL, right? So I'm wondering if there's more information about that.
That we will have to double check with Center for Accessibility. We're not entirely sure the breakdown right now, but the data is from the student reports, like from the surveys and the experience surveys, to see if they really have any issues. I think mental health is definitely the top one that they thought up about.
Time. So thank you so much again. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful talk.